Hi there. Welcome back to the Real Film Chronicles. As always, I'm Nathan.
And I'm Brian.
And on this week's exciting episode, we're going to talk about a couple of films. It Chapter 2, and It, the original miniseries from was it 1990?
1990, exactly. This is quite the value proposition for our listeners, I think. Not just one film, not just two, but three films. And the 1990 version was originally two parts. Like, it was a TV movie or TV series, right?
What they used to call a miniseries, I guess. Now they would call it, what do they call them now?
I think they call them limited series now.
Yeah, the exact same thing we used to do in the 90s, just rebranded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems pretty fair. And I think when I was reading about it, that original miniseries from the 90s was proposed as like an 8 or 9 part series, which I think would, in today's TV landscape, it definitely would have been at least 8 movies. Or sorry, not eight movies, but 8.
At least 8 movies. You know, at least like 5 lead-up movies with the main characters.
Yeah.
And then a team up. A whole cinematic universe.
Well, now you got me thinking, like a whole Stephen King, Castle Rock, Derry, It multiverse with all this stuff going on would be pretty wild.
Really what they got to do is like build all these movies, and really the Dark Tower movie ultimately would tie everything together, because they're kind of
like you're much more
familiar
with the Dark Tower series, but I imagine like that movie that came out a few years ago with Idris Elba absolutely bombed. It just derailed any hope of fans of that series seeing like a proper adaptation.
Yeah, I have yet to see it. And the casting, by the way, isn't a problem. Like Matthew McConaughey, Idris Elba, amazing actors. But like the Dark Tower saga, I don't know if it just tried to adapt the first book, The Gunslinger, or if it tried to adapt like more content than that.
Yeah.
Because it's a 7-book series. Well, 7 books in the main series, and then there are offshoots and graphic novels. But it's
pretty wild.
It's an epic story told across multiple worlds, and there's no way that I can see that you could boil that down to a 2-hour movie. So yeah, I don't know.
So the movie It, like the book It, for anyone not familiar, and I feel like everyone's pretty familiar with the basic concept here.
They're familiar
like
with
the
what?
Parallel story.
They're familiar with It?
A group of It, yes.
With what?
The basic story.
Of what? Of It?
Yeah.
Of what?
Oh man, you're killing me here. The basic story of these kids who basically encounter this murderous supernatural clown, manage to defeat it, and then 27 years later, as they're adults, have to come back and fight it again, right? And I think the novel is told in kind of a parallel alternating chapter between their childhood and them as adults. And the 1990 TV movie was done in a very similar fashion, where it was kind of focused on the adults with the child sections, like told 30 years of the past. It's kind of like flashback and like character building for the adults, where the new modern remake, well, you know what? It's not remake. It's a new adaptation of the source material.
Yeah.
In 2017 movie is focused entirely 100% on the kid's perspective. And then 2 years later, we get It Chapter 2, which is told from the adult's perspective, but we still get flashbacks to to them as kids, right? For more of that background and whatnot. What was your familiarity with It growing up? Because this came out in 1990. I was about 8, 9 years old at the time of this coming out. Were you aware of this? Had you seen it before? We watched it this past weekend.
No, I had no hype, no expectations. I have to confess still, I haven't read the book yet. I hadn't seen the 1990 version before. It's been around for a long time. It's been in like Blu-ray and DVD bargain bins for quite some time, and I kept meaning to pick it up. I just kept getting kind of pushed back. They announced the remake several years ago. Like, I didn't think it was that long ago, but it's already 2022, which is kind of frightening. Because I think It was with 2017 and It Chapter 2 was 2019.
That's right.
But I had no expectations for these movies. I had a general kind of idea about what they were about in terms of, you know, kids fighting an evil clown monster and then coming back as adults to fight an evil clown monster. But I didn't know really any of the particulars. I do remember
Yeah.
growing up watching a lot of Stephen King miniseries because like they love
It
adapting
was
those
impossible to avoid. Yeah. Like he
Yeah.
had so much content in movies, TV series, everything King wrote was being adapted into something. It was impossible
things.
to
Yeah,
avoid.
like
But
The Langoliers, The Stand is still. I love that movie. Unironically and unapologetically, or that miniseries rather, unironically and unapologetically. It's. I know that they remade that recently, and I have no desire to see the updated version. I think the original version was perfect. Perfect casting, perfect everything.
oh, that's fair. I haven't seen any of those miniseries from back in the day, but I remember them being on TV, and I can remember my parents recording them to watch them. I never got around to it. For the 1990 version, I think I saw one scene when probably my parents were watching it on TV that possibly scarred me for life. And it's a scene where they're in the sewers and there's the group of bullies bullying our group of heroes. And one of the bullies is pulled into a sewer pipe. But as he's pulled in, he's kind of like folded in half and screaming and just yanked into the pipe with like flashes of light. And he disappears. He's gone. He's dead. I saw that when I was a kid. And I'm pretty sure that's one of the reasons I avoided watching that original movie for so long, is just like, I know what the story is. I know that one scene, and that's enough to satisfy my horror needs for quite a while. But I'm really glad that we undertook this project to watch all three movies, because it was a good opportunity to watch this original movie. It 2017 runtime. We can talk about the runtime here. The original
Spoilers.
TV movie was running at 192 minutes, right? Like it's a beefy 3+ hours. The 2017 adaptation alone is 135 minutes.
Okay.
And then the part 2 is 169 minutes. It's a lot of content. And I think you said before we recorded that the book is just about 1,100 pages long.
It's a good
like it's one
pages
of
or something,
probably
yeah.
It's I don't know. Stephen King writes a lot of long books. His books are huge. And I'm not sure if this is one of the bigger ones, but it seemed like there was a lot of content, which would make it very difficult to adapt into any kind of piece of content. A TV series would make sense. A couple of movies make sense as well. Before we really talk about the movies here, what was your overall impression of watching all three of them there? Like what did you walk away with feeling?
I felt it was very complicated. Overall, I was not a huge fan of any three of these movies / miniseries.
Okay.
I gave them pretty low rankings on Letterboxd, which we'll discuss later. So on the one hand, as films and as narratives, I think that they were in large part failures. But on the other hand, for the past week, I'm still obsessed with especially the two newer films, the 2017 and 2019 films. I don't really like them that much, but I've been obsessed with them and thinking about them and going over them in my mind. So it's this weird love-hate relationship. I think they're well-made films. The 1990 version has its charm.
Yeah.
And there's a couple actors that stand out, but that one really, really shows its age. But the two newer films, really well-made films, good polish, quality talent going in. Something about them just didn't click for me, but I can't stop thinking about them. I'll get into why I think that is later on. But What did you think? What your first impressions of these works of art?
Yeah, so honestly, the 2017 I absolutely love this film. I saw it in theaters when it came out. I've watched it 3 or 4 times since. I'm absolutely enamored with it. I thought it was just a really cool, like really nice, gory horror film with some decent scares, some incredible imagery. The story is fine, but I like the coming of age, the coming of age aspect with the kids. I loved the actors in this film were just incredible. These kids, like they're in their early teens, I think they all did such a bang up job. The second movie, It Chapter 2, I was pretty disappointed with. Again, I saw that in theaters. I walked away thinking it was a very repetitive movie to what we got before. It was almost like I didn't need to see this in some way. And then the original TV movie, which of course I saw last, just recently, was a very interesting curiosity. It's almost like revisiting some of this older content can be really difficult for me to look at in a critical way because it feels like a product of its time. And I think if I'd seen it in the 90s, I would have more of a nostalgic love for it. But I mean, Tim Curry's turn as the clown was pretty incredible. Even though just over 3 hours of runtime, he was only in the movie for about 20 minutes, I think. But his performance was so good, it was that memorable. I did myself a disservice by not seeing it literally 25 years ago.
Yeah, and I feel like you saying the 1990 version feels less like a film, or it feels less like a film, and it feels almost like a time capsule of like that 90s, late 80s, early 90s kind of TV event. It's interesting.
Yeah,
it's like going back and watching. I love watching. My mom was a habitual taper of movies and films once we got a VHS player and you could start taping stuff. And for me, one of the interesting parts is going back and actually watching old commercials in between. Like,
yeah.
And it's like seeing, like, it's really interesting how that aesthetic has changed over time. It is like a time capsule, right?
It is kind of weird watching that TV movie now because it's built with commercial breaks in mind. So when the scenes end and they kind of fade to black, I know there's a commercial break right there. It's like I should be able to get up from the couch for 2 minutes and go take care of like a new drink or something. But you feel that, and of course you don't get the same sense in a movie. A movie has much more continuity in that way because there are no breaks. And I can't stop thinking about that on new content, even new miniseries and limited series on Netflix, Amazon Prime, HBO Max. They're all designed without commercial breaks in them, right? So going back to a piece of content like this, a 3-hour movie that feels like it has a lot of breaks in it it's interesting. It is at the end of the day, it's kind of a product of its time, but there's still some value in watching it in the context of, fans of it. And if you're watching the new movies, I think you owe it to yourself to see the first TV adaptation of this book. So what kind of things did you want to talk about? What didn't work for you in the new movies there? Did you kind of want to start with the first movie, the 2017? These kids are being harassed not only in their home lives, but by this menacing clown who Alexander Skarsgård plays. Man, this guy is phenomenal. He's in all sorts of content. I thought his Pennywise was actually really fantastic.
I think it's Bill Skarsgård, isn't it?
Is it Bill? Yes, sorry. You're right. It's Bill Skarsgård.
Alexander Skarsgård.
Just go back and yes.
No,
there's a bunch of Skarsgårds.
That's staying in. Alexander Skarsgård. He was Tarzan, isn't he?
Yes, you're right. Yeah.
No, that's
Bill Skarsgård.
This is going to be here for posterity.
Yeah, I think I first seen him in acting in the Netflix series Hemlock Grove. It was one of their first Netflix series that came out. So
I believe he was.
I think he does have a bit of that horror background.
Yeah, he was also in a film I watched recently. I think called Naked Singularity with what's his name, Finn from Star Wars, Boyega.
John Boyega.
Naked Singularity, and it was like, because I think he is still in the cultural consciousness. I think Bill Skarsgård is still associated with it. So to see him as another character is a little bit weird right now. It's almost like watching Robert Pattinson or Daniel Radcliffe or Emma Watson or somebody who are so strongly associated with those specific characters, and having to them having to work as performers and us having to work as audience members to kind of disassociate themselves from those characters that they're so ingrained with. I think that Bill Skarsgård might face that a little bit, and that's a tribute, or it's a result of how great he was in that role. He was super creepy. I don't know why any kid would walk up to him for any reason. Like, it's completely bizarre. But yeah, Bill Skarsgård, amazing performance. So well, let's go with the positive first. Let's go with what worked for me about this movie. I think
what worked for you with It 2017.
Like you were saying, cast amazing. I think this was when the world was just discovering Finn Wolfhard. Is that the kid's name?
Yeah.
Wolfhard?
It is Wolfhard.
Wolfhard? Okay. Yeah, Finn Wolfhard.
Yes.
was this around the time before or after he had started in Stranger Things as well?
Yeah, this is like a year or two after like the first season or two of Stranger Things.
Because for me, like that kid really stole the show.
Yeah.
To be fair, like that character Richie who's playing was given like a lot more to do. It's like the Bill Murray character in it's Venkman in Ghostbusters, right?
Ghostbusters,
You're given these great lines and this great character to play with.
Yeah.
But all the kids did a great job. The actor who played Beth, and I can't remember her name, who looked like Amy Adams more than Jessica Chastain, but still, it was great. Great casting all around anyway. But yeah, all the kids. I would like make as bold a claim as to say that this was the best group of child actors in this role since Stand By Me. Another Stephen King staple. But you had like Will Wheaton and obviously like River Phoenix in that movie back in the day. What was it? Kiefer Sutherland, I think, played the bully in that one, because like Stephen King movies about coming of age, you got to have one kind of murderous bully.
It's mandatory, yeah.
Who like to bring some real menace, either with a knife or a gun or some kind of weapon, but like go above and beyond standard bullying. So yeah, the acting really amazing, production value. Listen, I was like, yeah, this is really well shot movie. Special effects were good, but they
fantastic.
No, that's not the word I would use. Especially
really,
the first one, they were solid. The second one, they seemed a lot more janky, especially near the end when they had that big boss battle with spoiler alert, with Spider Clown Man. The special effect, it felt almost like a video game cutscene where you had to like have a QuickTime event and press the X button to dodge. It really had that look and feel of a video game almost. The first movie, no, that was pretty much it, I guess.
Those were all the positive for you.
Well, I think the relationship building between the kids and the Losers Club, as they called themselves, who were these outsiders, I think that was really the strength of the movie, is that character development and that interaction between those characters and between those actors. I think that's really the glue that kept the whole thing from unraveling completely. But yeah, for me, what didn't work in the first movie, or do you want to jump in here, Brian, and anything else that you...
Well, I mean, I have nothing but positive things to say about the movie, and I think you honestly touched upon a lot of them. I mean, I love the feel of the movie. I love the atmosphere. I loved like these kid actors were doing such a good job. I loved the dialogue and the camaraderie they had with each other. I love that there was not a single like respectable adult in this world.
See, that's...
like every single adult that I think was part of the story, because like, hear me out, is that all the adults may remember things going on and they're all kind of like reprehensible, but it is what it is. And it's like, it was really focused on these kids. I love the coming of age stuff. I mean, it has echoes of
coming of
Stand
age
By Me with, for sure. Right.
This is a great coming of age story. Yeah.
And I think it's something Stephen King's probably written very well. And I mean, like you said, there's the bully, and it's like, it's not just a bully. Like, this is like a villain. Like, he is doing horrible things to the point where it's shocking to see him. Like, he's carving his initials into this kid's stomach. It's like, that's really horrific.
Yeah.
And I love the gore in this movie. I love the over the top, like the blood fountain coming out of the sink. And it's just like,
right, but
I just loved all these things.
Like, a lot of that stuff, I think some of that was done practically, but like a lot of the, I'm just so tired of like the CGI.
There's a lot of
blood
CGI
and
in
violence.
the movie. Yeah. I mean,
it's just like, if you're going to build this as like a modern horror masterpiece,
it's going to have CGI in it. They all do.
No, cut out the CGI. Give me real buckets of blood. I want Evil Dead 2, fountains of blood shooting out of the wall, a real corn syrup dyed red.
Yeah.
Like, that's
okay.
That to me is like a horror film. Not so as you get like weightless CGI. Like, what really bothered me the whole time was these stupid balloons that were so obviously CGI the whole time. And like, some of those scenes is like, sure, it'd be really hard to get balloons to do what you want to do. They're notoriously...
Balloons don't act.
Yeah. Balloons are notoriously tricky to work with. They're very high strung.
Where's the balloon wranglers?
Yeah.
Where were they during the production?
But
right?
some of those scenes where it's just like a balloon moving across the room or something is like, why is this a terrible CGI balloon? Which is obviously CGI. It doesn't look real at all.
I didn't get that at all. Like you're
Took me out of it.
talking specifically about a scene like in the library. There's the balloon moving.
Why not have it?
Like in the
You
background?
can make a real balloon move across there. It just looks so hilariously
I
terrible.
thought it looked fine. I thought all the CGI. I thought there were some really creative uses of the CGI, like the morphing of the Pennywise clown into these different monsters and stuff, and like his head in impossible positions. Like, what about that scene where he's coming out of the fridge, right? Was that 100% practical? Like, did they get a contortionist to do this? Was it a bit of a mix of CGI?
I believe Corridor Crew did a breakdown on this. Again, another shout out to Corridor Crew. I think
friends of the podcast.
Yeah. Only in our fan fiction.
yeah.
But I think there was actually a contortionist who did some mocap for that to get some of the capture down. But it was largely done. Yeah, like that scene was pretty solid in terms of CGI, but I think it suffered from the same thing that a lot of movies suffer from, where like just, I don't know, the camera, it didn't feel like it was following a real thing, right? Like if you were to set up the camera and follow something around, it just felt like, I don't know, it felt to me there's just something, I don't know.
Okay.
That wasn't, it didn't have a whole lot of weight to it, but the scene itself was cool. Like when it came out of the fridge and it untwisted itself, the clown, that was
amazing.
Yeah, it was like, that was really unfriendly. It was a really uncanny, right? Because it's like, it looks human, but it's not quite human. And like you're saying, it's like, that stuff is genuinely unsettling, for sure. But is it, I don't know.
Well, all right. Agree to disagree on the effects. I think they all looked pretty awesome.
The effects were better in the first one than the second one. I will give it that. The second one, you can really tell. It's like, I don't know if they just like stopped caring or if the budget went down significantly for special effects.
One of the negatives that pops out for me in the first one is the use of jump scares. Like horror movies and jump scares, go hand in hand, right? And it's all about a movie's usage and earning the ability to use a jump scare, because I think they can be really effective. But here, it really felt like it was overdone, but I'm kind of willing to move past it because I was enjoying everything else so much that like every scene was like had one of these jump scares. And I hate it when they put in like those musical cues. Like a regular scene that just has like an intense punch to the score, or just like a really horrific sound effect that is just going to sort of make you jump a little bit. You have no option but to react to that. That stuff is a little overdone in this movie. That's the main criticism I'd have of the film. And I think the other criticism I'd have is that, and we talked about this while we were watching the movie, is that, Finn Wolfhard's character did not seem to get enough of a backstory into like him being terrified, right? All the other ones had elements that, like specific scenes and like different, like an arc to them encountering their fear. When he doesn't get any of those scenes,
they saved his for the sequel.
They saved his for the sequel, which it is what it is. But for the first film to stand on its own, which I think it can do fine without the sequel's usage, but it definitely felt like something was cut out. And when I'm looking into this movie, I see the very first cut was almost 4 hours long, and then the initial like director's cut was just about 3 hours. And then we get like a nice 2.5 hour film. I feel like there's another 15, 20 minutes of more character scares that I think would have been a little more effective to give every single character their due, because some were a little more favored than others. But honestly, I mean, that's just how it's going to be basically. But those are the elements that didn't really work for me. You want to talk about other elements? Or did you talk about stuff?
Why this film failed at telling a story.
Okay.
Why and why everything
for you
everything you like is terrible, Brian. Because there wasn't a story. This felt like a bunch of scenes that were stitched together, but it felt like maybe if they released like this 3 or 4 hour cut, it felt like we were missing connective tissue between scenes in terms of character development, in terms of narrative development, because a lot of times it would just cut to another scene, and I'd be just like, what the heck just happened? It'd be like 4 months have passed, and and you're not going to acknowledge anything in between here. You're not going to acknowledge what happened in the last scene. And part of that is due to the runtime. Part of it's due to they cut a lot of content from the novel as well. So I haven't read it, but I was doing some reading and research. One of the things that bugged me, there were a bunch of things that bugged me about this that they never addressed in any way, and it was so frustrating. One of the things is like Pennywise the clown, this vampiric alien entity that could take on any shape, any form. It could attack people apparently in their dreams, in their homes, anywhere and everywhere. And why didn't it just kill these kids right away? It was killing kids left, right, and center. What was special about these 7 kids in the Losers Club? And apparently in the book, it actually explains that, where there's this cosmic deity who's essentially granting them protection. It's like, okay, is it a great explanation? I'll leave that up to audience members to decide. But it's like, this, it's apparently like the cosmic turtle. Weird stuff. I think that was during Stephen King's cocaine phase. But at least it's like, okay, so there's a greater battle of kind of good and evil going on, and these kids have some kind of protection. It's like, okay, like things like that, like leaps in logic is like, why is this clown just not straight up killing people? Or like, I think they touch on it briefly. It's like, why is he terrorizing these children? I think there's one line near the end of the movie in the final battle where it's like, oh, your fear makes you tastier or something. It makes you taste better. Or I think in the second one, it's like, he says something about feeding on their fear. Or maybe it's in the first one too. I don't know. They kind of get mixed up. But it's like, get it straight. Are you feeding on the fear? Or is the fear like marinating the kids so they taste better? It's never clear why this thing is doing what it's doing. And then the whole thing with all the adults being like pedophilic or just plain like abusive or evil. It's like, it left kind of an unsettling feeling, which I suppose was the point. But if they would have explained that, I think in the novel as well, maybe in that 4-hour-long director's cut, it explained there's like, oh, there's something almost like a supernatural spell, and like the town itself is almost like an entity, and all the adults are essentially like larger parts of this entity, and they're having there's some influence that it is exerting over the parents. Because it felt weird that like every parent was some kind of like weird overprotective or abusive individual.
It's probably pretty fair to say not all the adults were bad, but the movie focused only on the bad ones, including the bad parents. There's some parents we never got to see at all, and it's probably safe to say they were just normal people who were just raising these kids. And I mean, all the kids are pretty good, right? The people's values have to come from somewhere, so there must be some goodness there. But I do agree that if that explanation was in there,
and then
it might have helped a little bit. And I think what makes it difficult is like you're talking the cosmic side. Is that too much for an audience to really get into for like a movie like this? I mean, that's already like 2.5 hours long.
This, what we're calling a quote unquote movie, which is really just a series of random scenes where like this kid goes and has something scary happen to them and they run away. Then it cuts to the next kid and they have something scary to them and they run away. Then it cuts to the next kid and they have something scary to happen to them and they run away. And then they're all in a haunted house together going to fight this supernatural entity. I was like, that's just a series of vignettes. They're not even tied together. Like there's no resolution to these things. Like, oh, it's supposed to take on their deepest, darkest fears. It's like, is Eddie's deepest, darkest fear really just that random painting in his father's room? Like it doesn't represent something deeper than that? They never delve into, like, none of this makes sense. It's all surface level, kind of like you said, like jump scare nonsense, where it's like, there's nothing deeper or more meaningful about this, but they're trying to play it off like it's deeper and more meaningful. Like it's taking on their deepest fears. It's like, really? In the second film, like Richie's deepest fear was Paul Bunyan? Like that's what his deepest fear was, really? Honestly, I think he says in this movie that his deepest fear is clowns. But then it's like, well, why does he get chased by a giant Paul Bunyan in the next movie? It's like, none of this makes any kind of sense as soon as you start breaking it down. I'm not asking for this to be Shakespeare. I'm not asking for this to be Scorsese. But on some level, in your own world that you're creating, things have to make, there has to be an internal logic. There has to be enough connective tissue. Like right now, it's just watching it. And it's so frustrating because all these performers, all these actors are giving it 110%. Amazing performances from everybody. Like, especially when the kids are battling this thing and you can tell, like, it's hard to act afraid. And these kids, you can tell that they're
selling it.
They're selling it hard, man. They're doing such an amazing job. But all it is just like a series of like, oh yeah, can you guys see this blood? It's like, yep, adults can't.
Do you
Let's
think
clean it up? are you going to explore this any further? No, we're just going to drop it. I was like, nothing. They put out all these Chekhov's guns, Chekhov's machine gun. They're flying left, right, and center. Like Chekhov's bullets were littering this thing, and like there was essentially what happened was there was all these loose threads, and nothing was tied together. And it was just like, it was so frustrating watching this thing, because it was like, this is a great scene on its own. And then jumped to another scene that had no connection to the last scene. And then it was a great scene in and of itself. And then they jumped to another random scene, and it was a great scene in and of itself. But like, it's not telling a cohesive story.
Do you think that part of that, like going back to your comments about how the thing these kids are most afraid of doesn't really make any sense, right? Do you think that's representative of like how as kids we would really demonize single elements and become super afraid of them? And this movie was kind of like commenting on saying, yeah, you know, there's a painting. And it's a creepy painting. This kid would be very afraid of it for no real logical reason. And I mean, I've been afraid of things when I was a kid in that same way. And this movie is giving them something to like really be afraid of and like facing those fears as they move into adulthood, right? It's like they are kids who are just afraid of things. And now they have more things to be afraid of and move forward past their fears.
That would be cool if they like talked about that in the movie at all, which they don't. But to that point, there's an infamous scene in the original It, which you're probably aware of, in the book that is, where at one point after defeating the evil clown entity, vampiric alien It thing, essentially Beth, the one female character of the group, she has sex with each of the other members.
Now, from what I understand, that happened before they beat the super clown because she thought they were all going to die in that fight.
No, I think what happened was like they fought it
that.
and they were trying to find their way out of the sewers, but there was still some supernatural something happened. But they needed to, essentially like this bond they needed between them in order to find their way out of the sewers. Anyway, I happened to...
Okay. Well, neither one of us have read the book, so we can't say definitively, but yeah.
But anyway, I happened to be reading this. So somebody posted that passage because it's a really weird concept to put on page and why it happened. And it's a good thing they didn't adapt this in the movie. In that passage, I happened to read that. Somebody posted it on a Reddit thread because they were talking about how weird that was. And somebody posted the actual text. It's like, it's weirder than you think. But in that passage, in Beth's internal monologue, as in between having sex with all of her 6 closest friends at the age of 14 or something?
Yeah,
13 or 14. She's talking about equating it with sex, essentially. So like the scary thing, the unspoken fear that they have is not just sex in and of itself, but like that maturity, right? Becoming adults, that impending mortality, right? So if they would have explored that theme in the movie, like there was something underlying where they talked about, it's like, oh, have you done it yet? Right? Mm-hmm. Meaning, have you done sex? Where like it was this stand-in word for sex, but like having sex was this, essentially it was this marker of, this delineating, childhood from adulthood.
Well, that's it exactly. It's like that's the turning point that they were going for. Is that
but like
sex is becoming an adult, right?
Yeah, that's not the only thing. But in Stephen King's telling of it in the original novel, it was metaphorical. Like having sex was metaphorical of that journey to become adults. But like there was nothing similar thematically in the movies. Like obviously they're not going to show a bunch of 13-year-old kids having sex. This isn't the 90s. They're not going to do that again.
Well, let's just say in the 90s they don't have that in the movie either. So it was
no, but I think wasn't there a movie Kids where they essentially it was very kind of sexualized and all the kids were really young?
Yeah, there is. Yeah, well, for sure there's that type of content out there, but it's like smartly, like in the 1990 production, they avoid.
Yeah, they avoid
scene.
Smartly. Like again, this was I think in Stephen King's cocaine phase where he wrote this, but this is the thing in the movie. It's just like surface level scary stuff. Where Eddie, he's a germaphobe. He's afraid of disease, so he gets the diseased man chasing him. But that's never explored in any depth. It's all just like so surface level. But the movie is trying to make you think like it's something deep and thoughtful and provocative. And that's the thing that I think for me is
So
the
really,
disconnect.
I think for what you're saying here is like the only way this could work is taking your approach of the Avengers style, where each of these kids is like given one movie a piece before encountering like the summer of this, 1990 or whatever
Yeah,
year it's
I
in,
don't know.
for them all to get together.
I think it would have worked better as a limited series where they had time to explore each of the characters in more depth, to like take some of that
Well, that's always
content.
an issue in today's content is like, does this work better as a TV series? And especially in today's TV landscape where these are movie production quality stuff.
Ever since
And
The Sopranos came out
right?
and kind of changed the landscape
Yeah,
of what's
yeah.
possible on TV, I'm just like, yeah, TV used to be like the bad word among, it's like
Yeah.
if you work in TV, your career's over. It's like now people are going to like, they're begging to be on TV shows because they have like funding and actual writers and craftsmen
Yeah.
throughout them, right?
And I know you're not watching the new MCU or DC Disney Plus TV shows, but there's a lot of conversation going on between should this have been a movie or should it have been a TV series, right? Because it's they have kind of a similar production quality to it. And there's filler in some TV shows, and then there's not enough stuff in the movies. And this is kind of the same thing where you probably could have expanded this into truly, like when they were adapting in 1990, an 8-episode miniseries that would be 2 hours a piece or something. You would get so much more character background. It's a limitation of the media.
Potentially, or make it a trilogy then. I know it kind of worked in two parts because like adult and kid, and that's how they broke it out. But like, if you have that much story to tell, where they had like a 4-hour cut and they had to cut so much story that it affected the actual final product in terms of like legibility and like being able just to follow logically what was going on, make it a trilogy.
Well, this is the thing.
And delve into these issues. Like, what's the actual, like, delve into the trauma that people are experiencing. Because I mean, spoilers for the second one, but one kid as an adult is so afraid to go back, he kills himself before he even gets a chance to go back to Derry and fight this thing again, right?
Yeah.
It's like, that's obviously they're suffering from some crazy trauma. It's like, that's an interesting topic to explore. Like, not just like fear, but like PTSD or like how that has an effect on you psychologically. And they drop that thread immediately.
I am curious how much more of those threads are explored in an 1,100 plus page book that Stephen King wrote, right? I mean, there's a lot of content. We're talking about one movie where there were only the kids side of it.
Yeah.
There's a whole second movie that's over 2 hours long. That's all the adults, and it has more kid flashbacks of like their childhood. And it's like, there's a lot of content. Do you think the movie, I mean, we're talking about what could have been or should have been. Do you think they could have or should have made the parallel story just like the 1990 version, where it's sort of, we're focused on the adults and we're in parallel, we're being told the stories of them when they're kids, and sort of like add a bit of context and flash back to those scenes that maybe make more sense to develop their characters? Do you think, we should have seen 2 or 3 movies in that format? Or do you think it was a big mistake to just do one and one, like the children and then the adults, one after another movie? Because did the 1990 movie do it any better in that way? Like, was it a bit more coherent story for you?
Well, I think if you were going to do this as a series with, a couple seasons in it, maybe like, do 3 seasons, 6 episodes apiece.
Yeah.
Then it makes sense to have then it makes sense in this episode, we're going to flash back and forth between, say, Richie's story as a kid and as adult, and see like the connective tissue between the fear and the trauma that he experienced as a kid and how that's affected him as an adult coming back. So you can draw those stories and have those episodes per person and have the revelations come through. And it's like, the whole thing is like, it's a coming of age story. It's a story about, friendship and camaraderie and that kind of power of friendship and love winning out over evil, which is common theme. If you look at something like The Dark Tower, a common theme is a close group of friends coming together, and it's the power of the bond, the special bond between those friends really becoming family. And that's really the power, and that gives them the strength to overcome the evil in the end, right? So to explore really, in depth the bonds between these characters and them having to, cope with their fear and face their fears in a more substantial way, and say is like, oh, well, what's the actual fear? I think it touched like with Eddie, and you see his mom and how she's overprotective and how he's got hypochondria, and it so kind of delved into his story a little bit. But I really wish they would have like explored that a little bit more in depth, and it's like the psychological ramifications of that overbearing mother figure, which were like, oh, it was so like, it was a very surface level, but like there's a lot to delve into, and then like there's some meat potentially they could have added to this sandwich, but right now it feels like a couple pieces of plain bread stacked together. That's the movie It for me. Like it's
fair enough. Let's move into the second movie.
Okay.
I don't have nearly as much to say about it, and I think it's probably safe to say, like, this is me projecting my opinions on you as well, as that it was a even bigger disappointment. Like it was a disappointment from the first one. It was worse than the first movie, the 2019 It Chapter 2.
Yeah, I put them on par. They were both
equally as bad for you.
Though that I'm not going to say is bad, because like well, I'll give you the rating later on. I didn't rate, these weren't the worst movies I'd ever seen, but it was
no.
They failed in different ways. The other thing they got right, again, casting. They got an amazing cast of characters. Again, I think Bill Hader as an adult
Bill
Richie,
Hader.
He got
Jessica Chastain.
Yeah.
You got who else is there? James McAvoy. I mean, that guy can do anything he wants. There's I can't think of any other names off the top of my head, but there was a lot of talent in this movie as well.
Oh yeah, again, casting and acting, not the issue here at all. All the people were perfectly cast. You could like also props to the casting directors for perfectly matching the child actors and the adult actors.
Yeah. Well, it's always difficult because I remember seeing like an interview. This is probably like 20 years ago. And they were talking about how it can be really difficult to match them up and have a consistency between the two characters. And you can't have the child actor trying to emulate the adult actor. It's like, they're just getting started acting. It's like they are doing what they do. And it's like, it's up to the adults to try and mimic some of that behavior that the kids were putting into their performances. Right. And I think they did a fantastic job here. I mean,
tell that to the kid from Project Adam. He got Ryan Reynolds nailed, man.
Oh my, yeah. You know, you're 100% right there. That kid.
What's his name?
That kid's got Oscars in his future.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, I don't even care. I want to see that guy. I want to see that kid just doing like an hour long of just him like riffing on Ryan Reynolds characters.
One of the weirdest things, I remember seeing Chapter 2 in theaters and walking out thinking, that was pretty disappointing. And I remember my biggest complaint was it just felt so repetitive. And I think the structure of having the stories told in parallel would have been more effective, because the adult story here is that they've all moved away from Daryl and they've all forgotten everything about their childhood. And when they receive the call to come back, they all sort of instantly remember how horrible things were, but they don't remember all the details yet. So it's them coming back to town and slowly remembering. They have to go on like a personal quest to go find their horrible memories, right? And then they have to go do the exact same thing before and go overcome their fears, which they already did when they're kids, and defeat the evil clown monster again. So it felt like the exact same movie, but with less interesting things going on.
Right.
I don't know.
So you've hit the nail on the head. I think one of the fundamental flaws in It Chapter 2 and trying to tell this story is you're trying to tell a story about a bunch of people who don't remember anything about what happened. And they're trying to discover all the stuff that we as the audience already know from the first movie. So we're trying to watch the
it wasn't
characters
that long ago.
Trying to catch up to where we are. And then the movie
Could
just
you
ends.
Imagine? Yeah. Could you imagine if like the first movie, like It Chapter 1, only the kid's story was told in 1990? If it literally 27 years go by in real time, we get a follow-up to that movie. It's just like, if you haven't seen that movie in 20 years, this would feel pretty fresh.
Somebody call Richard Linklater.
Right?
Get him to make
and that's the guy who would do it. And I think that would have been interesting, but obviously, not in our reality here. But that's sort of where we're ending up with, is like less than probably a year and a half, 2 years, we get Chapter 2 with a very strange conceit there. And then especially, I mean, you're watching these movies for the first time, literally one night is Chapter 1 and the second night is Chapter 2. The effect would have been would be even heightened for you in that, I would think.
Yeah. All of a sudden it's just like, well, like I know all this stuff already, and I'm watching these characters figure out stuff that I already know as an audience member. It's like, well, why? Like, I could go to the bathroom for a couple hours and come back to the ending when you guys caught up to me.
And this is where I would really indulge in your issues when you talked about the first one, where it doesn't get into like the bigger universe. It doesn't explain like possibly the cosmic deity protecting this group of like the losers club. I think this is the movie that should have done more of that stuff.
Yeah.
And it didn't do any more world building. And that's why I think I like the first one is I don't need the world building in that movie. But the second one, we've got almost 3 hours of runtime here again. They could have spent more time talking about the greater things instead of them literally showing the same structure, the same fears, the same scares over again. This movie really did not work for me on that level.
Yeah, some of the totems, like I think, was it Stanley who was the one who committed suicide before he came back?
Yeah.
And his totem was something that we didn't even see in the first movie. It was some random thing that was told in a flashback in the second movie, the shower cap or whatever, to keep the spiders out of their hair in their secret hideout.
It's like there was a
like,
secret hideout that wasn't explored. It's like, oh, is this 20 minutes of content that was cut from your first movie?
That hideout, that should have been in the first movie. Like, that's a pretty big thing. And it would have been easy just to have like a couple second scenes, like, or not a couple second scenes, but have one scene in the original movie where like, oh, we're going to build this hideout and hang out. And then it'd be so cool in the second movie to see the hideout again, right? It's like build those locations. But I think what you're saying in terms of what worked well in the 1990 version worked well, I think, having not read the novel, but switching between those two perspectives, telling the same parallel story of the adult and child versions side by side. I think that really works because you have, here's these people who have amnesia for, again, the movie doesn't explain why, or just in the vaguest terms, it doesn't delve into like the memory loss of the incredible power that it has reaching across at least the continents of North America. It can influence people that far away. Yeah, in terms of, they're trying to get their memory back, and then, you do a flashback to when they were kids. So like as they're rediscovering their childhood, we're discovering it along with them, right? That makes sense narratively. And then we see the connective tissues like, oh, why did Richie throw up as soon as he got that phone call from what was his friend again who stayed behind in Derry there? I can't believe I'm blanking. One of the most important characters here. He kept watch on Derry for 27 years after everybody else. Mike, of course. Yeah. Mike called him. He had this gut reaction. He didn't remember him, but like when Mike calls everybody, it kind of triggers something subconsciously, and they all immediately come back because of the pact they made when they were kids. But something psychological, like deep down, they all get this fear, not even though they don't remember each other specifically. But then explore that as like Bill and Ben are remembering their childhoods, and we're taking that journey along with them. That's an interesting movie structure. That's an interesting narrative structure. That's something that will keep us engaged. And then you're seeing that connective tissue between, here's this fear as a kid, and how does that fear translate to me as an adult? Is it going to be the same fear, or is it going to be, I've outgrown that fear and I've developed, I fear different things as an adult now, right? I have different anxieties, different stresses, or like see how that trauma has affected me even subconsciously. Like looking at like childhood trauma and exploring that, like you don't have to go super in depth, but like consult a child psychologist. That's an interesting story. That's an interesting theme. That's something, that's the meat in your sandwich to explore, where you're trying to, if their journey was trying to, not maybe as the childhood journey, or they're overcoming their fears, and then their adult journey is overcoming that trauma that they experienced as kids. It's like, that's an interesting, compelling story, but we get none of that beyond surface level. Again, you're saying exactly what you're saying. They're repeating the exact same story structure, whether everybody goes off on their own. Pennywise shows up, scares them. They run away. They find their totem, which is they're supposed to use to in some ritual to defeat it.
Which is not even clear if the totems were even necessary or not, because it just seems superfluous to the final, the climax of the movie. They all burned their totems, and the monster still came after them, right?
Yeah, so that was pretty much the whole movie mission was kind of a bust. There was no payoff from that. In the books too, I was reading online as well, people were saying that Stanley killing himself, actually, because the power came from all seven of them and the bond that all seven of them shared, was that him killing himself at the beginning, because there's only 6 left out of that circle, that caused problems, and that's why they couldn't defeat it right away. That's why they had to build up power again. So like there were like all these little details that would have been simple to put into the movie that they just completely lost. Like, I don't know who was adapting the screenplay from the novels. Yeah, I'm gonna say they did not do a very good job. I'm sorry. It was not great. It was not a great adaptation.
Yeah, I think chapter 2 really exposed the issues of adapting this style, like this content, like the book, into the way they did. And I kind of wonder if they did it just as a reason to sort of set themselves apart from the 1990 TV movie.
Oh,
because
probably
the TV movie worked so much better in that parallel story structure than having the two movies separate. For me, the first movie really worked. I really enjoyed it, but it was almost more of like a standalone movie that I enjoyed. And then chapter 2 comes out and it's like, no, I'm not having this at all. Right. It's just like, I definitely recognize the issues of chapter 2. And it's like, I much prefer the story structure as a whole for the 1990 It. And I really don't have much positive to say about chapter 2.
Yeah, well, like that, the story structure was one of the very few things that worked for me about the 1990 version, keeping that story structure intact of the parallel stories of the children and adult versions of the same characters. The one thing I did like, I would pay good money for a movie of the adult Richie and Eddie characters just going and reacting to scary stuff happening. I wanted a whole movie of them reacting to like that crazy scary dog.
Right? Yeah. If HBO Max was around, you would have a spin-off It series of just those two guys. It'd be 4 or 5 episodes, and
I want them just like Scooby-Doo style adventures where they're going to haunted houses and just have those two react to some scary stuff. Like that.
Oh my God.
That's the thing too, is like there's little kind of cute little sparks where Pennywise had this weird twisted sense of humor, like those 3 doors where it's like, scary, very scary, and not scary at all. I was like, that's really kind of neat little touches. Like, like that, where he's messing with them, but it's like, okay, this creature, whatever it is, there's a playfulness there. There's a sense of humor, right? It's like it's feeding on children. Again, also, while I'm thinking about it, we all float down here. What the hell does that even mean? So all those corpses of all the victims were floating in this giant above his skull pile, his skull throne there. Yeah. That was never explored, how anti-gravity was working there. It was like, why was he doing that? What was that, like the engine to a spaceship or something? Or like, why was he had telekinesis? He was just using that power to float the victims around. Yeah. What was going on? Why? I mean, why do we all float down here? That makes no sense at all. It's supposed to be a scary line. I was just like, are you going to explain ever what the hell that means? We all float down here. It's like, okay, we float like on the water. It's like, no, in the air. But why? I'm
a big believer that we don't need to have everything explained, especially something like that.
Absolutely, but we have to have something explained at some point, right?
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. But it's like something like that. I enjoy theorizing on what it was, and it's like here for me, my interpretation of the floating was like, this monster needs to eat, right? And he does feed on some of the kids right away, but he needs to preserve them because he only comes out every 27 years. Again, for reasons unknown or possibly only explained in the book. I really don't care which one. But for me, it was like making them float was like just kind of a way of preserving them in a refrigerator. But you know what I mean?
Was it's just technology that he built. Was it him just wasting energy? I care because they don't give us anything. They don't give us a single clue about how any of it works. I don't mind theorizing about this.
But we're talking about cosmic deities here. How could we possibly
I'm just talking about,
expect them to explain every little thing?
I don't expect them to explain every little thing. I expect them to give me enough clues, leave it ambiguous, but have an internal logic in your world. I
got enough clues out of it.
There was nothing in there. I didn't find a single
thing.
We
had the history of this thing being hundreds of years old. And he has technology and powers that are far beyond our comprehension.
Does he have technology? What technology? There's nothing there. Is it just
power / technology? If you really want to get specific on the language of it, I mean, it really doesn't matter if you ask me. Maybe the book will give you some answers on that.
Yeah, I don't want to have to read a 1,000-page book to understand this movie. Nothing about this makes sense.
Maybe there's like an encyclopedia, Wikipedia article for you to like really get behind the science of the It movies.
It was so This is the thing too. Is like I wanted to theorize about stuff like the deadlights, but like,
well, what happened to imagination and stuff?
Well, I mean, what happened to like respecting your audience? I don't know. What happened to like narrative structure and telling a story? These are all very good questions, Brian. Like the deadlights. Why didn't he kill Bev when he had a chance? His motivations made no sense.
He was preserving her.
Scene to scene.
She made her float.
For what reason? Why though? Like how much energy how much energy it would take to float a human body for 27 years? Does he get that?
Are
from
you
eating one
talking
kid?
science now, or are you talking about supernatural powers? I mean, which one do you want?
I don't know. I want them to tell me what they're talking about because I don't think the
Like you want him to explain that like maybe he's feeding off the Earth's core and like the geothermal energy to get these powers or something.
I would have liked the filmmakers to have put at least a quarter of as much thought into this as you and I put into this within the past half an hour, which they clearly did not.
All right, so moving on to 1990 It, because I mean I think your desire for that is kind of hopeless, but that's fine. 1990
You sit there
It
in your wrongness, Brian.
What do you want to say about the 1990s version? I mean, this was both our first experience with watching this movie. For me, it's like it definitely felt like a product of its time, but I really had respect for the parallel story structure, had a lot of respect for Tim Curry's performance as Pennywise the Clown. I thought it was incredible, and I loved the way he like injected that humor into it and like scariness. With like he maintained this character so well for a character that's only in it for like 2% of the movie. It was pretty gnarly, and the biggest standout for me is this is a TV movie from the 90s. It is based on all the restrictions from TV. And I was reading about this, and it's like one of the restrictions that they couldn't show blood coming out of an orifice. So they couldn't have like somebody vomiting blood, for instance. They can't show someone's nose splurting blood. So they had to find like different ways and just like basically have things happen off screen. Like at the beginning when the child loses the boat into the sewer. I mean, very iconic.
Yeah.
In the modern one, his arm is chewed off. In this one, it's just inferred in dialogue that his arm was missing, right? And it's just like we don't get elements like that. So we get a very sanitized version of this, but we still have a fairly compelling piece of movie TV content that I thought was pretty decent. What'd you think of 1998?
I think, yeah, if you put it in the context of being a 1990 TV movie, I will say it is what it is.
It is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, the structure was good. I mean, you had like actors like Harry Anderson in there. People might know from Night Court, or people might be wondering what the heck I'm talking about if you're not of a certain age.
Well, you had a young Seth Green in here.
Young Seth Green.
Who, even though we were talking about it throughout the movie, I could not place his voice in the movie. Like I couldn't hear it. I knew that person was Seth Green, but I just couldn't see it. I'm so ingrained with maybe the Mass Effect Seth Green voice fit.
By the way, yeah, all this discussion about who the best Joker is Seth Green. So for all you Mass Effect fans out there,
you're not wrong. You're not.
But also, obviously, John Ritter was also in there as well.
John Ritter,
known from
Jonathan Brandis.
Yeah, it was kind of sad though too, watching like because John Ritter and Harry Anderson are both passed now, so it was like watching it from our perspective now in 2022. It was like there was a little level of sadness watching some of these great comedic actors who had passed. It was also, I think, one of your favorites from one of your favorite TV shows there.
Annette O'Toole.
Yeah.
From Smallville. She played Clark's mom in Smallville. Yeah, she was great to see in an earlier role there. There was all sorts of familiar faces here. It was really neat there. And before we go into things, I forgot, I looked at the filming locations of all of these movies. All three movies were filmed in Canada. The 1990 version is Vancouver production. And the two new movies were filmed mostly in Port Hope, Ontario, which is just down the street from basically in the middle for both of us.
Yeah.
So next time you're traveling, just take a dive over into Port Hope. Probably recognize like the City Hall, a bunch of these different landmarks that they filmed all around the greater Toronto.
We know our next road trip now. Complete side note, but I love how on the Scream Factory editions of horror movies, there was this special feature where I can't remember the dude's name, but he would essentially go to all the locations they filmed at.
Oh, okay.
And some of them, especially for like the David Cronenberg stuff, where he filmed in like downtown Toronto and stuff, which is in our neck of the woods. And it's like, this is a doable. We could actually go and see where some of these movies are filmed. So it's kind of those are the kind of special features I wish they would throw on the discs and stuff to see. Port Hope is like, of course, go down there.
So, what else? what else do we want to say about it 1990? Or what were some of the things that didn't work for you? I don't really have a lot of commentary on this one aside from just just looking when I'm watching it. I was just basically looking for the differences, and all the differences were just like censorship. I felt things weren't as intense.
It was a pretty bloodless movie. It wasn't super scary. We read more of like a coming of age film. Like some of the child actors, there were some solid ones. Like the guy who played, I think Bill, was really good. I think he played in Sequest eventually.
Yes.
Some of the child actors were not great. Some of the adult actors weren't.
Oh, that's the other thing we talked about while we were watching a movie that I wanted to talk about here, or at least just mentioning, is like the quality of the acting, like especially the kids. It's almost like there's like schools popping up earlier. It's just like there's more opportunities for these kids to get ahead in starring in movies and TV and different pieces of content.
I think that's a function more of the budget of the film, which like you can't do like a nationwide casting calls. Like you got to, if you're filming in Vancouver, it's like essentially you're casting within the greater Vancouver area. Kind of, you got a couple big name people like
it's
John Ritter, but
yeah. Well, that's the thing, and the trivia is neat, and I mean all of it's coming from like IMDb trivia here for me, but it's like, John Ritter was apparently dying or itching to get into a piece of Stephen King adaptation.
Oh, nice.
It's just like he finally got into it. This director, Tommy Lee Wallace, he's done Halloween 3, classic, right?
Love Halloween 3.
Yeah, and he did Fright Night Part 2, which was a big meh for me. That's fine, but he didn't really do many other movies. He's probably more of a TV guy. And it's like back then there was such a bigger divide between TVs and movies. It's like people did not go back and forth that much. Not like they do now.
I think also there's a different attitude with the studios now, where like now the studios look, it's like, oh yeah, TV can put out quality, like high quality content, where back then it's just like, let's just fill up 3 hours of time.
Yeah.
I think it shows, right? I think the attitude shows in terms of like, obviously production value is not going to be the same. Yeah. For me, it wasn't a great production, although like still with the understanding that they were doing the best they could with what they had to work with, obviously. And all like like you were saying, the censorship, I didn't really clue into me until like you pointed out, I think like halfway through, and it's like, oh yeah, they weren't allowed to use blood in this. It's like, now that you pointed it out, it's like, this is like the least bloody, the least violent horror movie.
Yeah. And the effects really take a hit, because like the whole spider monster at the end, I mean, it's all practical effects. I'm not sure it looked good at the day. I mean, it's impossible to say at this point. But I mean, watching it in today's lens it's difficult, but I can appreciate the realism of what they were doing. It's just,
although it's a testament to the 1990 version that the 2019 version of the spider didn't look any better. So I mean, I can't dock them marks for that, really.
Oh man. And I think I told my story about the kid being sucked through the pipe earlier. That was like the most significant thing for me to happen in this movie. I was delighted to see it again on screen.
There were some really neat moments in that.
There's some messed up things happening there. Yeah.
Or that shower scene where he, I think, pops up to the drain. There's some like practical effects in terms of the warping of the floor and stuff. It's like there's some actual kind of neat stuff.
There's some creative stuff happening there, and then without a doubt.
Yeah, there was some neat stuff, but it's like, it did not hold up for me. And maybe again, if I had seen it as a kid, like I remember watching the Stand miniseries as a kid, and I love it now. And like, I'm fully willing to admit that part of that may be due to nostalgia. But still, even if it is nostalgia, the fact that I didn't see it when I was younger means that I don't have that nostalgia factor to help boost it up a little bit.
That's pretty fair.
One thing I want to highlight in the ending and how they defeated it in the 1990 miniseries compared to the It Chapter 2, it felt really weird where in the It Chapter 2, 2019, the way they defeated it was the same way they defeated him in the 2017 version, which is like to stop believing in him, I guess, right? Just like, But then they were like calling him names and essentially bullying him into submission, which is like a really weird message to send to especially younger audiences like watching this, where like they were bullied, and it took a toll on them psychologically, but then they turned around and essentially it was like bullying this clown guy.
You got to bully back.
Bullying. It was a really weird kind of message to give to the kids, where this one was just like, oh, we're gonna fight back and rip his heart. They rip his heart out both times, and it's symbolic of, taking the steam out of this guy or like cutting him down a couple notches. But like, I know like even in It Chapter 2, I think they make Stephen King makes a guest appearance, as he usually does in a lot of his adaptations.
Oh, yes.
And I think one of the things that people criticize King's work about a lot is that his endings turn out to not be that great compared to the rest of the work. And he pokes fun about that a little bit because Bill's character, James McAvoy, it goes in the shop and he's a writer, a horror writer, obviously an in-world analog for Stephen King himself. But the pawn shop owner is played by Stephen King, and he's like, "Do you want me to sign a book for you?" And Stephen King's like, "No, I don't like your endings." Obviously poking fun at himself. But I think that again, not having read the original novel, like both the endings of this were kind of a letdown in terms of like, I like in It Chapter 2, like the after they killed it and like they're celebrating and they do the dive into the quarry again. And, that's kind of like symbolic of washing all that pain away. And then there's kind of that resolution, and then it does that cutscene back to when they were kids and the first time beating it and walking away. And it's like seeing that connection of like, oh, that bond was never broken, even though it tried to destroy that bond. Right. But and then in 1990 miniseries, they just kind of like, it had used the deadlights, which again, they didn't explain in any of the movies.
Because they don't need to.
They just started calling them the deadlights. Sure, whatever. They didn't explain how to.
Because you become dead when you look at them. You're done.
But they don't. Beth doesn't die when she looks at it. She just gained. In fact, not only did she not die in the 2017 Beth actually gains.
Don't lose your train of thought. What were you trying to say?
Superpowers. She gains clairvoyance into the future. But based on the endings of these movies, I don't know if it was like the source material, but it just seemed that they did not know how to end the conflict with it. Like they weren't sure how to do it. Like the writers, that is, whether that was Stephen King himself or whether that was the people adapting the screenplay from King's work. But it just kind of petered out at the end. We're just like, I guess just have him call some names, and then he turns into a puddle and they rip its heart out. And the 1990 version is just like, it's a giant spider and it has used in the deadlights and it freezes everybody and they can't move. I guess we can just like have the spider be pushed over and they rip its heart out, I guess.
Yeah. That was hilarious. The one guy falls victim to the deadlights, right? He's frozen. His buddy's like, "I'm going to come get you." He goes over, but no, he looks up. He's frozen now. He's looking. Then the third guy comes over. "No, I'm going to help you, both of you." I looked at the deadlights. I'm frozen.
It's like, and I hate to make light of situations like this, but there was, you hear stories about somebody who goes into a building, carbon monoxide, and they pass out. Somebody sees them on the stairs, goes to rescue them without knowing, and they pass out.
Yeah, man, that's grim.
That's grim. But like this was played. It wasn't played for laughs, but this was a lot. This was pretty funny. Yeah. It was like you see something. Yeah. You see like one body, maybe you rush in to see what's going on. But you see two bodies lying there. It's like, I'm going to call the cops. Maybe. Maybe it's like, maybe I'm not going to just rush in and stare at them.
Can you imagine if the kids had cell phones back then? They could at least just call the cops into the sewers to help them out a little bit, bring some firepower.
The cops in Derry are probably all child molesters too, like every other adult in Derry was apparently. But so I will say though, in the 2017 version, that the first one, I think like when they face off against it the first time, and it is like Pennywise the clown is like, he's got Bill. He's like, if you give me Bill, I'll let the rest of you guys go. And all the kids are like, and then Finn Wolfhard's Richie gets up and gives a speech about, it's like, first of all, you dragged me down to the sewers. You dragged us all down here to the sewers, and you made us go through the gray water. And it's like, and now I'm gonna have to kill this fucking clown. It's like, it's one of the it's an amazing line and an amazing delivery, because you think like, oh, they're gonna abandon Bill. And it's like, they did a really good job building that tension. It's like, oh, maybe they are gonna give up their friend to go live. It's like, no, listen, for all the grief I've given, it's like there's moments like that of just great writing, and like Finn Wolfhard shows off why he's gonna be a big star. But that line is just great.
There's one thing I'm hearing here is that the only element of it 2017 you liked was Finn Wolfhard and his performance and his crazy his crazy lines.
Pretty much Finn Wolfhard. The rest of the crew there, that the actor played Beth too. She was really good. I want to see her in more stuff. I think she's going places.
Well, it's funny you mentioned she looks like Amy Adams. She was in an Amy Adams HBO series, Sharp Objects, which I watched a couple of years ago. I didn't realize it was that same actress, but I think it's a child version of Amy Adams. Like it's flashback scenes. I believe it's so. There's some connection there at least.
It's funny. It's like it reminds me of like in Nocturnal Animals, where I think Amy Adams and Isla Fisher were casting next. I think people have been for a long time have been making the comparison that they looked a lot alike.
Yeah.
Then the director specifically kind of cast them but to kind of play on that kind of meta knowledge. But yeah, like the child actors were all great. But yeah, Finn Wolfhard was a standout in that one, and Bill Hader was a standout, I think, in the second one as well. But they were just given, I think, those kind of characters. It's easier to have fun with as a writer, right? And so they were given better material, I think.
So before we jump into our own actual ratings, I'll just give you some averages from around the internet, and including the box office, which I always forget to include in these episodes, but this is a perfect opportunity.
It was like a huge box office success, right?
Huge success. $700 million worldwide. The 29th biggest grossing film of all time.
Yeah, isn't it still like the biggest horror movie, like box office wise?
Probably. I think it broke all the records for like R-rated movies and horror and stuff. The sequel, about almost half at $474 million.
Ouch.
Worldwide. Obviously the TV movie doesn't have any figures like that. In terms of, but apparently in 1990, the second part of the movie was the most recorded episode or movie from TV. So people were really busting out their VCRs. They did not want to miss the second part of it in 1990. And I think that's got to count for something.
I guarantee somewhere my mom has a VHS tape version of this. It's sitting beside like Langoliers on a shelf somewhere.
Yeah. In terms of ratings, as everyone knows, we use Letterboxd, a movie site where we log movies. We can write reviews. The user base there is given it 2017 an average of 3.5, the 2019 part 2, 3.0, and the 1990 version has an average of 3.1, barely edging out the part 2 of the modern adaptation. IMDb follows a very similar structure, 7.3 for the 2017, 6.5 for its sequel, and 6.8 for the 1990 TV movie. Rotten Tomatoes, the exact same thing, 83%, 62%, and 68%.
Wow.
Which honestly basically lines up with my own ratings on here, where I think I've given the 2017 It is like, if I had to rank these, and you have to rank these right now for the podcast, you have no choice. My ranking goes, 2017 It, probably 4.5 stars. 2019 It, Chapter 2, 2.5, 3 stars maybe, and then 1990 It, a solid 3 stars. How's your ranking of these movies?
So before I give the ranking, I was like, I really thought with how popular It 2017 was, that the ratings were going to be like, the user ratings were going to be a lot higher. I expected in like the 4.5 star range, because like seeing how popular it was and how much money it made, right? Like,
I think, honestly, I think like a 7+ on IMDb is considered pretty high. The Letterboxd one, 3.5, is pretty decent for something like that. I feel like I'm kind of surprised by the 83% Rotten Tomatoes. Like, that's the critics' ratings, right? If that's pretty high for a horror movie, really.
Rotten Tomatoes ratings are pretty much useless. Like,
yeah, I mean, we have our issues with that, but it's a metric that we can't avoid in the movie
fair enough
that we're in.
But I expect that's pretty high, though. Like,
and for me, like the 62% on the Chapter 2 is way too high for a critic rating on Rotten Tomatoes, but it is what it is. And I kind of thought, I mean, going back to 1990, Rotten Tomatoes wasn't around. They've just accumulated, was like a couple dozen old reviews to put together that metric, but
yeah,
it is what it is.
All right. So my rating is, I ranked them the same as you. So It 2017,
that's fair.
It Chapter 2, and then It 1990. So,
that's different order for me.
What do you mean?
I rate the 1990 higher than the Chapter 2.
Oh, I thought you had them in the same order. Oh, no. So the first, so I gave on Letterboxd both It and It Chapter 2 2.5 out of 5 stars. They both felt like half a movie was made, so it felt appropriate to give them exactly half marks. Put them together, 2.5 plus 2.5 equals 2.5 still, because even together, they still only feel like half a movie.
Really? You should have given them movies like 1 or 1.5.
No, because they were, listen, like they were still competently made movies, great actors, great performances, like shining, a little bit of a shining, to use a pun here, of a great script shining through.
Can you hear my head knocking back and forth?
But they utterly failed in terms of storytelling, in terms of narrative, in terms of thematic exploration, in terms of just the basic fundamentals of storytelling. They failed utterly.
Were you scared at all during these movies?
No, and that's the thing too, is like
So failed at being a horror film.
they were
too.
branded as horror films, but they felt more like coming of age films. If they had branded them as like coming of age drama with some horror elements,
Honestly, I think that's where my enjoyment from the first one really. I mean, I love the horror elements, but I love the coming of age stuff, and I love that combination. It's like Stand By Me if it had horrible
Killer clowns,
Pennywise
yeah.
the clown in it, right? It's just like that'd be a perfect movie, and it's like I kind of feel like I got that with this one.
and
Anyways,
then
go on.
yeah, and then the 1990 version I gave 1.5 stars.
1.5.
Yeah, I mean,
Wow.
again, it was like I had to rate with what I had to work with here. It was like honestly, outside of like I loved watching some of the actors there, like Lana Lang, and then Night Court Judge and Three's Company there. They were all doing a great job.
I thought you would get bonus points for. I thought you were a big Tim Curry fan for some reason.
Yeah, see, and I am, and I thought I was expecting, maybe it's because my expectations were different. Like Tim Curry did an amazing job, but I was expecting more like Rocky Horror Picture Show Tim Curry, like wild, crazy,
yeah.
especially after seeing what Bill Skarsgård did with the character. Not Alexander Skarsgård. I'm never going to let that go, by the way, Brian. But like, yeah, he's like, that was a really restrained Tim Curry. I wanted to see like the evil Grinch grin like he gave in like Home Alone 2.
The issue, yeah, honestly, the issue is that Tim Curry was acting out of a sewer grate the entire movie.
Yeah.
If he wasn't acting out of a sewer grate, it was a hole in the shower. It was just
if
like
he had been given like the same the same leeway that Bill Skarsgård had, and like had the same he would have been a lot better. But yeah,
like really amped it up.
but like
And it didn't help that he was morphed into a giant spider for most of the final fight, right? Like Pennywise the clown guy disappears into a giant spider.
yeah, and it's
puppet,
not
so-
even like in the new version. It Chapter 2 is like it's an anthropomorphic. It's like a clown body on a spider.
Yeah.
Clown like upper torso on a spider body. It's just like no, it's just like a spider, a giant spider with no face. So Tim Curry can't even get in on the final battle. But no, Tim Curry is also part of that 1.5 stars. Everything else, like the script, the production value, is just like, yeah, it's a 1990 TV miniseries, a horror movie that wasn't allowed to have blood in it. So it's like, I can't really give it that much. The only other thing that I liked about it again was that story structure, that they really did a good job of, telling the parallel stories of the adults and the kids at the same time. But yeah.
So when do you go out and grab the book? Like, are you compelled to check out the book at this, or maybe focus on other Stephen King content first?
I am now, because I have this morbid curiosity, because despite all the smack I've talked about it and It Chapter 2, I find myself utterly fascinated by the components of it, the story about getting older, the story about looking back on your childhood and the friends and the relationships you had, and then comparing it now to where you are in your life, and being able to draw those through lines, and in your own mind, you can play those stories in parallel where you're living your life now, but you're flashing back to when you were a kid and making some of those connections in your own life narrative. That to me is the really fascinating thing about these movies. And I think that's the thing that keeps me engaged with these movies, even though on a narrative level, they don't work for me at all. But there's that element in them. There's this weird spark where like, I have to pick these movies up now. I have to watch them again for the performances, but also for like, there's some weird nagging. It's hooks into me somehow, as Stephen King stories somehow do.
Yeah, like you even said it, a week later, you're still thinking about this movie frequently, right? And it's like, if it's a really bad movie, I pretty quickly push it out of my mind. It's like, I'll give it my ranking on Letterboxd and just kind of move on with life. But sometimes a movie just has these elements that grab you. They just keep inkling away in your brain.
Here's the thing. I know that I've talked about these stories failing narratively or failing at storytelling elements in general, but I appreciate a good failure. That's how we learn. I think there's a disconnect often where we talk about, as a society or as a culture, of failure being our greatest teacher. but then we always try to build this safety net of like never letting anybody fail. So like I talk about these movies being failures to me, failures narratively, but I'm still fascinated by them, and I still want to revisit them, even though they don't work for me. And like I talk about them being failures, but like 2.5 stars out of 5 is not like the worst movie in the world either. It's not the worst rating.
Yeah,
you
far from
probably expected them to be much lower after all the stuff I was saying. So like, yeah, it was frustrating to watch, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, like because I'm thinking about like, oh, my childhood story, how would it play out if I were to tell my story now as a redacted-year-old man versus when I was like a 13-year-old kid, and play those stories in parallel. Like what's the influence between, you know, the 13-year-old self and my redacted-year-old self? That's the interesting thing, and that's the fascinating thing, and that's why I think King is fascinated with this as well. Stephen King, if you look at stories like Stand By Me, based on the short story The Body, you know, Stand By Me is this iconic coming of age film, you know, about this group of friends as kids, and kind of, you know, told from the perspective of one of them as adults. And then you find out at the end, like, what their lives were like and how people drift apart and how people, you know, they change, but they're the same person, even though they're different people, and that kind of paradox of identity. And I think that theme, that you can find in a lot of Stephen King's work it's really fundamental to the human condition. And I think that's what keeps people coming back. For all the criticism I give to Stephen King's work as well, I think he's one of those writers where somebody else made this comment, but Stephen King never uses one word when two will do. He tends to be very verbose, and he tends to write a lot more than I think he has to, and explain a lot more than he has to. I think Stephen King, reading his work, is the opposite of the movies, where the movies didn't give me enough to work with, and Stephen King just gives me too much to work with, and there's like a sweet spot in the middle. But for all of the criticisms I have for King's work, I still find myself every once in a while, I'm coming back, I'm engaged by his stuff, and I'm fascinated to read the next story, right?
Well, it's really, my dad was, and I mean, still is, a huge Stephen King fan, and I think read a lot of his content. I remember him telling me many, many years ago that Stephen King became such a huge writer, so popular, so successful, that they really did not need to edit his work anymore. Like, his work doesn't go edited in the same way it would for like anyone else. And especially at the beginning of his career, if you read his books at the beginning, they're going to be shorter, they're going to be more concise, they're probably going to be a bit better. But later on, no, he's too big that he can bypass editing. And then we get these giant novels that are 1,100, 1,500 plus pages. That's just like, oh, nobody is... Yeah,
to
it's
his
to
detriment.
his detriment is that he doesn't get editing anymore. It's like you really need someone to go in and edit these movies, these books down into like better books, basically. And especially with the comment that all his endings suck, maybe you could use some help with that through the editing process. I don't know.
Better is the right word, because I don't know if I'm as a you know, like an aspiring writer myself, if I'm in a place to criticize one of the most celebrated writers of all time. Yeah. But maybe like you saying, like, just clean it up and polish it a bit more. I think maybe is the polishing and running that by. Maybe like, it's tough to tell. We're speculating purely. This is pure speculation on our parts. But like Stephen King may have been barely read his own success, right? Whereas like, he got successful. He was a good writer, obviously. He is a good writer. He's not dead. He is a good writer. But maybe because he got so big, you know, being in the right place at the right time, got so big and got so popular that people were like at the upper echelons, editors and publishers were afraid to, you know, chase away that spark of that magic. And maybe it was like an unfortunate kind of cycle of, you know, becoming a victim of your own success in that way. Either way, stories are still gripping, and we're still talking about them, whether it's in
100%.
Book form or the movie adaptations, of which there are literally, I think, now dozens.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Real Film Chronicles podcast. Thank you for listening and hanging out with us today. We really appreciate your support and look forward to you joining us for the next episode. We can be found around the internet and social media, with our home base being realfilmchronicles.com, which will have all the links you need to follow and keep in touch with us. Until next time, take care of yourself and others, and keep your film journey going.